So I want to talk to you about the abnormal Fibroscan. The Fibroscan, as you know, is a tool that allows us to try to determine without a liver biopsy whether the liver has fibrosis. Fibrosis is the result of inflammation, and fibrosis in its most extreme form is called cirrhosis of the liver. The whole point of liver health and gastroenterologists treating patients with liver disease, including fatty liver disease, is to prevent cirrhosis of the liver. With fatty liver disease, there are no prescription medications that will reverse fibrosis or prevent progression of fibrosis or reverse cirrhosis. For the condition called NASH, non-alcoholic steatohepatitis, there currently are no prescription medications available. There are, however, several clinical trials going on around the world and in the United States, and we are participating in several clinical trials. The reason that we participate in more than one clinical trial is a couple of reasons. The medicines that are being studied work differently, and we're trying to figure out which ones work the best, and potentially combinations of medicines put together may be beneficial relative to a single medication used by itself. The other important issue is that there are different stages of fibrosis. Some clinical trials are for people with advanced fibrosis, or what we call early cirrhosis. Others are for earlier forms of fibrosis of the liver. Without a liver biopsy, we don't know for sure where you stand with respect to fibrosis. All of the clinical trials require a liver biopsy. That's a good thing for you, and it's a good thing for us, because ultimately, without a liver biopsy, we really don't know the stage of fibrosis, or if you want to put it another way, how severe is your liver disease. So a liver biopsy is part of the process within the clinical trial. We typically don't do liver biopsies outside of a clinical trial because we don't have any medication to offer you with the information that the liver biopsy provides. The only treatment that's available outside of a clinical trial right now is to lose weight and exercise. So wouldn't it be upsetting if we subject a person to a liver biopsy, tell them that they have fibrosis, and then tell them that they need to exercise and lose weight? We could have given that person, we could have given you that advice without a liver biopsy. But with the advent of medication that's available, and specifically with the medication to be chosen, or in this circumstance, the clinical trial to be chosen based upon the degree of fibrosis, that liver biopsy becomes very important to us. That's why it's required. Another important point is that the liver biopsy is used to determine whether your liver is responding to the treatment. So all of the clinical trials have a liver biopsy performed after 12 months. Some of the clinical trials have a third liver biopsy that's performed 5 years after the clinical trial is started. So these clinical trials, in fact, one of them is a 7-year trial. Another important point I want to make is that all of the trials have what's called a placebo arm. And what that is that patients are randomized. In other words, we don't know and you don't know whether you are going to be put on the real drug, excuse me, or whether you're going to be put on a sugar pill, or what's called placebo. Now, typically 25% or a third of the patients will be randomized to a placebo, whereas the majority will actually be put on what we call the investigational product, or the real drug, if you want to call it that. Now, interestingly, one of the challenges for us with fatty liver disease is that a large number of people that are put on the placebo actually improve. And you may say, well, why does that occur? The answer is, under most circumstances, is that you have just found out fairly recently that it looks like you have a severe liver condition. That's why we're talking right now. And when you enroll in a clinical trial, people become serious about losing weight and exercising, and we know that that's good treatment for fatty liver disease in many circumstances. So a large number of people that are put on a placebo actually improve because they begin to exercise and eat better. That's a good thing for you and a good thing for your liver. It does make it more difficult with respect to doing clinical research. Another important point. The pharmaceutical companies don't want it to cost you anything to participate in a clinical trial. So all of the treatment is at no cost to you. The other thing that's important is that the office visits, of which there are many, you can think about pretty much an office visit every month. Some of the clinical trials, it's less frequent, and as the trial progresses, for example, in year 2 or year 3, the office visits may be as infrequent as every 3 months or 6 months. But I want you to think about having to come into the office a lot more commonly than you would if you were not in a clinical trial. There's a stipend for those office visits. There's also a stipend for the liver biopsies that are done. One of our clinical trials requires an upper endoscopy. There's a stipend for that, and of course there's no cost to you to have any of this done. An exception to having any cost involved would be, for example, let's say one of the medications causes some itching, or what we call pruritus, and we need to prescribe a medication to help with the itching. That would come under your health insurance plan. Of course, we don't know if the itching is because of the drug. You may be on a placebo and develop itching. So there are a few things that may fall outside of the clinical trial with respect to your insurance being involved or potentially you being involved. But those things tend to be few and far between. The office visits are at no cost and there's a stipend to you. In other words, you get paid to come to the office. The procedures that are done are of no cost to you. The medication is of no cost to you. Laboratory studies, which are done very frequently, are no cost to you. So those are important points. Another important point, you are our patient before you are a research subject. And what I mean by that is that our responsibility to you, and again, this is very, very regulated, is to you as our patient first. If at any point we believe that it is not in your best interest to be involved in this clinical trial, you're taken out of the clinical trial. If at any point you do not want to continue to participate in the clinical trial, you can remove yourself from the clinical trial. And again, I want to emphasize that you're our patient first. The reason that we're talking about a clinical trial is that there's some benefit to you that can only be offered by us through enrolling you in a clinical trial. I also have to say that there's some altruism involved. You are helping future patients with liver disease by participating in a clinical trial. As I've mentioned before, if you're on any prescription medication, that medication would not be available to you unless it was first studied in a clinical trial. So others have volunteered their time to participate to get those medications approved. So again, I hope you find this information useful. We want to thank you for considering enrolling in one of our clinical trials. The process begins when you make the decision after visiting with us, after reviewing the informed consent form, after signing the informed consent form. That's when the process begins. Nothing can be done with respect to clinical research in any way, shape, or form until an informed consent has been signed by you and by us. That's regulated by the FDA. If you have any questions after reviewing the informed consent form, we're available to meet again and provide another office visit for you. Once the informed consent form is signed, all of the follow-up at that point will take place through our research office. Until the informed consent form is signed, all of the care involved with your liver takes place on the clinic side of our practice, just as you have been a patient of ours and have a relationship with us, that's where the care is provided. After the informed consent has been signed, from that point on, everything is done within our research division. Another important point, many patients, almost a half, and in some almost 50%, and in some circumstances more than 50%, ultimately will not qualify for a clinical trial. There are very stringent criteria, laboratory studies. Some of them, if they're too high or too low, you'll be excluded from a clinical trial. Another thing that happens commonly is that when the liver biopsy is done, sometimes it's not as bad as what the Fibroscan implied. It may be that the Fibroscan leads us to believe that there's significant fibrosis, but when the liver biopsy is done, we take you out of the clinical trial because there is no significant fibrosis. So there are several steps along the way. And just to briefly go over those steps, the first thing that will occur once you sign an informed consent form is a 2 to 3 hour visit in our research division where a bunch of questionnaires will be completed, a complete physical examination, laboratory studies, blood will be drawn for laboratory studies, and it's a lot of blood, just to warn you. A lot of test tubes of blood will be drawn, an EKG will be performed, and plan on spending 2 to 3 hours with us during that visit. Once the laboratory studies have been reviewed, it will be determined whether you still look like you're a good candidate. And if you are, the next step would be a liver biopsy. And after the liver biopsy is done, we again review whether you fit into one of our clinical trials. Now, sometimes the liver biopsy unexpectedly is better than we thought. Other times the liver biopsy is worse than we thought. Now, if that's the case, you would potentially qualify for a different clinical trial than we initially thought. So it's one of the reasons that we have different clinical trials, is to try to plug patients into the appropriate trial based upon the liver biopsy. So the Fibroscan is used as our initial guide, but ultimately the liver biopsy tells us the true health of your liver and what needs to be done. Assuming that the liver biopsy does in fact show significant fibrosis and we plug you into a clinical trial, again, plan on office visits within our research division on a monthly basis for the first 12 months. And again, you are randomized in a blinded fashion to receive either the medication, and again, we don't know and you don't know. You're randomized to receive a pill. The pill may be a placebo, it may be the real product, and the way that we determine whether it's working or not is by following you along, measuring laboratory studies, and again, a liver biopsy is done at 12 months, and if you're responding to the treatment, the trials typically go on for much longer than 1 year. But that's a good way to think about getting started in one of our clinical trials for NASH, or what we call non-alcoholic steatohepatitis. And again, I want to thank you for listening to this, and if you have any questions, we're here to answer them. Thank you.